Hello, everybody. I'm Smiles Lewis, and you are tuned into the Anomaly Archives presents a review and discussion of the recent Rice University Archives of the Impossible grand opening event that was held back in March 3rd through 6th, well, just about a month and a half ago. And our guests today each participated in various ways. Myself and two of our guests were actual panel participants in this event. And our third participant was an attendee who has, of course, his own insights into the phenomenon, and we'll get to hear what they all have to say about their experience with this event, what it means to them, what they think it means to the larger UFO field, that sort of thing. For those who aren't familiar, we are the 501c3 nonprofit Anomaly Archives, headquartered here in Austin, Texas. Sadly, since the ripple effects of the pandemic, we have had to go into storage, have been in storage since the Snowpocalypse of February 2020. We are still working hard on finding a new location that we can afford in this ever increasing rental market here in Austin, Texas. But we're always happy to do these kinds of virtual events where we can reach out and interact with folks, both live and on the flip side in the recorded vodcast, which you can find, of course, through our website, anomalyarchives.org, or at the YouTube channel that you're probably watching this through, or our Facebook page, which is another place that we're transmitting to live. So I'm just going to give a brief, I'm going to read some bios for our guests before we bring them on all in a second here. But our three guests tonight, or this afternoon, are Greg Bishop, who's a good friend of mine from many years back. Also, David Metcalf, who is an acquaintance of mine that I've became aware of several years ago and have just been so enamored with everything he's doing. And of course, Mike Clelland, who really surged onto the UFO scene with his very personal experiences of these strange phenomena, these high strangeness UFO events and their synchronicities involving owls and other related phenomena. So in 1991, Greg Bishop co-founded a magazine called The Excluded Middle, which was a journal of UFOs, conspiracy research, psychedelia, and new science. Wake up down there. Woo, hit me in the face. Why don't you? A collection of articles from the magazine was published in 2000. His book, Project Beta, documented a government campaign of disinformation against a UFO researcher. Weird California, a portrait of strange and eerie history and places in the Golden State, followed in 2006. His latest book, It Defies Language, features essays about topics surrounding UFO and related issues. Radio Misterioso features Greg's interviews with researchers as well as scientists and academics who are involved in fringe topics. Our other guest is David Metcalf, who is a researcher, writer, and multimedia specialist focusing on areas where creativity, culture, and consciousness collide. In 2011, he established the Liminal Analytics Applied Research Collaborative to focus on building multidisciplinary lines of communication through applied scholarship, digital media, and social network development. Metcalf is the editor-in-chief of the Windbridge Research Center's Threshold, Journal of Interdisciplinary Consciousness Studies. In addition, he is currently working on a long-term transmedia project with Dr. R. Andrew Chestnut, Chair of Catholic Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University, to document the growth of devotional traditions associated with Santa Muerte. Also, this afternoon, we're going to have Mike Clelland, whose 2015 book, The Messengers, was met with high praise in that he explores the mysterious connection between owl synchronicities and UFO abduction. It was his firsthand experiences with these elusive events that have been the foundation for his research. The book is also a personal memoir and a journey of self-discovery. Mike is also considered an expert in the skills of ultralight backpacking and is the author and illustrator, a very excellent illustrator, I might add, of a series of instructional books on advanced outdoor techniques. Some of his other books include Hidden Experience, the collected writings from 10 years of his blogging, and Stories from the Messengers, which are the collected stories of others that have contacted him because they found such resonance with his work. Well, thank you all for joining us. Let's bring on our guests right now. Hey, Mike.
Hello.
Hey, David.
How's it going?
Good. And hey, Greg.
Now I'm going to get all the conspiracy people. Why did he salute?
It was the secret handshake. So thank you all for joining us. I guess I just want to dive in and say, obviously, this was a very long event over the course of 3.5, 4 days back at the beginning of March. There in Houston at Rice University, which is considered a STEM science, technology, engineering, and mathematics campus. But this event is very special in regard to its being through the efforts of the humanities department that Jeff Kripal is associated with. I'm probably going to get all the details of his rank and place there incorrectly, but we'll get to that soon enough. He's making it twirl.
There we go. Okay, keep going.
Mike makes the world go round.
It's backwards, so it's a little curious. Okay, keep going.
So as somebody who's been fascinated, nay, obsessed with these phenomena for all my life, and which led me to the founding of this nonprofit Anomaly Archives here in Austin, Texas, I've seen the importance of preservation of these materials of UFO researchers and UFO experiencers, and all the many different areas that these things encompass. And this is a very important discussion about a very important topic and a very momentous event. But at the same time, we've got to have a sense of humor. So I appreciate that, Mike. So I guess I would like if we could each kind of, this archive is not about Jeff Kripal, but obviously he is the driving force behind it, and without him, it likely would not have occurred. And I'm kind of curious how each of you came to, I guess, be aware of him, and to what degree you might have had any interaction with him. Obviously, secrets can be kept, so don't have to reveal anything that you don't want. But I'm really curious because just personally, I guess I first heard about Mutants and Mystics, and still haven't read that, but really thought that sounded like a very important and interesting book. And then it was, of course, his book with Whitley Strieber, who is, of course, one of the donors to the new archive, and the book Supernatural, which I very much enjoyed. But what really, really won me over is the authors of The Impossible, which of course is the source inspiration for the archives of The Impossible. And I won't go into my journey of discovery of this archive just yet, but so I'm curious, Mike, would you lead us off as to like what was your pre-existing knowledge of Jeff?
I did a audio interview with Jeff in, I guess it would have been around 2012, right when Authors in the Impossible came out. I was running a podcast called Hidden Experience, and that was my blog. But I did that podcast for about 6 years, and that book blew my mind. The Mutants and Mystics, and I made the joke, which is not really a joke in a way. When I remember, I kind of said, like when I introduced him, I think I said something to the effect of like the world's, like there was the Big Bang and then, the molecules coalesced and it all culminated for me. Like the reason the universe came together was so I could read that book. And he laughed when I said that. But that book was, wow, it just tapped into exactly, so basically it was comparing and contrasting the East Coast comic book authors, New York City comic book authors, and West Coast New Thought people, like Esalen Institute type folks, including Whitley was in that too. Like he was part of that, which I guess he would have been on the East Coast for part of that and on the West Coast for the other part of it. But wow, did that book, a big focus of it was comic books, superheroes, and their superpowers and such. So, and the psychic powers that were being introduced in the New Thought movement, like Esalen, and people who are having sort of high strangeness experiences while creating comic books and the trippy content of the comic books. And that Christopher Knowles turned me onto that book. So once I had the conversation with him, then I started following his other books, and over the years, I've probably had about 3 or 4 phone calls with him over the last decade, and he's gotten back to me on emails and stuff. So, and then also I was working with Whitley, doing a podcast on his network for about 2.5 years, and I also contacted Diana Pasulka, and there was a few other people on the panel. Oh, and the thought of meeting Jacques Vallée was so important to me. So when he had this, the event was scheduled for 2021, and the pandemic kind of, made that impossible. And so when it came up in this year, the spring of this year, I was absolutely going to attend, like no question. So I just basically contacted Jeff and said, I'm coming. And I was glad I did. It was I had a great drive. I did a beautiful drive I'm in Seattle now, and, through that part of the West, which is a part of the West I love. So it was just a really fun overall trip, leaving the house here and visiting some friends on the way and such. So that's how I got in touch with Jeff, was through through Mutants and Mystic, that book that meant so much to me.
Yeah, and I'm sure it had special import being an illustrator yourself.
Tons, yeah. And especially the quirky kind of, comic books are not high art, they're like low art, so, and that's kind of where I've kept my illustration style. It is not high art, it is comic-y, it is Mad Magazine, it's low art. So I had a real strong affinity to that. I didn't go to like art school and do figure drawing with oil paints or anything like that. I was, copying Mad Magazine and doing Honey Nut Cheerio TV commercials and animating and stuff like that in my time when I was doing full-time animation, or full-time illustration. Part of that was doing a little bit of animation. So
now, David, I guess you're the more academic of the four of us. I'm not to short sell anybody else's background, because I don't always know everybody's life history, but you're actively engaged in the academic realm. Is that kind of how? Was that your touchstone first with Jeff?
No, actually, so I'm academic by sort of having like stumbled into it, just because that when I graduated, I didn't go on to grad school. I just used the fact that I had started working in marketing and that to become an independent scholar, use those skills to kind of become an independent scholar, and actually started blogging around the same time that Mike did, and writing about these areas. And one of the things that I'd written a piece in 2011 focused on the Esoteric Renaissance. So kind of the move in academia to start looking at occult systems and esoteric thought and magic and that. Which in Europe comes out of like Wouter Hanegraaff at the University of Amsterdam. But in the US, it was actually Jeff Kripal that was sort of facilitating that through Esalen. And Eric Davis had written Technosis. Eventually, Eric Davis would go on to become a student of Jeff's at the Rice program. So kind of writing about that, I saw what Esoteric was doing, and as I was looking into these kind of seminars that Esoteric was running that were bringing different thinkers together, including Chris Knowles and Mitch Horowitz and stuff. Mitch Horowitz, working at Penguin, became a big driver. He got Supernatural out with Whitley and Jeff. Just watching those kind of lines and watching that happen, I became really interested in the fact that looking back on what the Center for Theory and Research at Esalen had done in the past had influenced all these different areas that I was interested in, from the psychical research, to some of the like transpersonal psychology, and that they had such a sort of, such an in-depth thing. And Jeff was kind of the leader of that, starting, in the late 90s and into when I was writing about it in 2011 and till now. So, I've been kind of focused on that area and sort of writing in those streams. And I ended up in different web magazines and that were, within that kind of milieu. And Jeff's work it stands out. I mean, he's really sort of reconceptualizing and theorizing in this space in a way that is generative to other people's thoughts, and it really kind of opens that up. I mean, his idea of the authors of the impossible, like just these little like seed ideas that he's putting out there are just really powerful, and really speak to kind of what's going on. I mean, like the author of the impossible concept, the idea that there are these writers and figures out there who have some sort of charismatic connection to the phenomena, that when they write about it, culture is created around that, and culture kind of, people start to sort of interact around that. That's fascinating to me. And it was something that, if you look at the field and you look at sort of how, the phenomena centers on experience and centers on people's lives, that really kind of stands out. And, so Jeff's theories on that is really powerful. The mutants and mystics, the role of fiction and metafiction in the phenomena, really poignant. My friend Joseph Matheny had done Ang's Hat, which sort of created like a conspiracy culture around it, and had an effect on society in a really interesting way. So Jeff's mutants and mystics sort of spoke to what I was seeing with some of my friends and that were writing and creating. But it really wasn't until I met Diana and started corresponding with her, and she sort of introduced me to Jeff and Whitley and that. And yeah, I guess because I lean towards the scholarly. I'm the scholar in virtual residence now for the Windbridge Institute, and Julie Beichel is one of the newly appointed directors of the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, which Jeff also is as well. And Julie Beichel is one of the founders of the Windbridge Institute. So I sort of exist in that space in a weird way. I mean, it's interesting though, you say, like I'm not really in the academic world so much as I correspond and write with a lot of academics.
Gotcha.
Because I really started out as a blogger, so I have no right to be in that space, but I am. By default, I've ended up in that space. But yeah, so just corresponding with Jeff and that, and talking to him. I wrote a piece about the supernatural because I actually had a bunch of very odd experiences with it. Just sort of synchronicities and strangeness surrounding my interaction with that book and the publication of that book. So, some of which had to do with owls. And it was weird. I had a sort of weird experience when I realized that Mike had started writing and blogging at the same time that I had. My first blog was called The Eyeless Owl, as sort of a joke on the Bohemian Grove owl and the Illuminati eye, so it was sort of a joke and play on that. But I started writing in 2009, and it was actually Mike was on Whitley's podcast and talking about that experience, and I had this really insane sort of like time displacement when it all sunk up, and it was around the publication of Supernatural, and other things were going on that were weird. So I don't know, long sort of rambling thing. I guess I just sort of fell into it, and in that sphere. Jeff's sort of like a planet, you know, and his gravitational pull pulls mutants and weirdos in, and I just ended up being one of those weirdos that sort of got sucked into that.
Well, you mentioned his now being connected to this BICS, Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, which really kind of brings everything back to, you know, I've been describing to people this thing with Tom DeLonge and the, you know, all the ex-spook government types as that one sea change that's been happening that, you know, a lot of people are suspicious of, but then there's been this academic sea change that's happening, and now it's all kind of coming together, which is kind of interesting. But Greg, so what brought you into Jeff's orbit of influence?
Everything they said, everything Mike and David said was part of it. I actually was introduced to him before I'd actually read any of his books, and then I ended up reading Mutants and Mystics and Authors of the Impossible. That one really affected me. It's one of those things where you read something, or you hear something, or you get in touch with somebody, and you realize, one, you've probably been traveling down the same paths in your own way. And so they kind of repeat what you've been, you know, thinking, or even what Jeff did. You know, and David and Mike and you, Miles, do this too. I will think something, and then you'll express it in an even better way. And I go, yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say. And this is what I felt with Jeff. And also, you know, just like David said, I got in touch with Diana Pasulka, and she introduced me, and that's how I came to know Whitley better, and some other people that are involved with the archives, including Jacques and God, who else spoke there? So many people. Leslie Kane spoke there. And as David was saying about academics, I'm not an academic. I'm probably less of an academic, you know, around that sphere than David is. But after meeting Diana, Jeff, Stephen Finley, Chris White, people like that, Hussein Agrama, and I started talking with them. And because of this, I met up with them at the American Academy of Religion conference in San Diego a few years ago, before pandemic. And we went out and had breakfast. And that is the out of all the little meetings I've had with people, it was the first time I realized that these people were talking about the subject, you know, inspired by Jeff in a lot of ways, but they were talking about the subject in a way that made me excited and made me think, wow, I can actually learn something from these people, progress in my understanding, and start asking the questions that I want to ask. I mean, they were formulating questions before I even thought of them. And this is incredibly helpful to me, and made me make this decision to probably pursue this in an academic way. So I'm sort of looking into that. But yeah, as far as Jeff is concerned, I think he might have said this, or somebody might have said this about him, and David sort of hinted at this. To me, he's kind of a synchronicity generator. When you get near him and start talking to him and start interacting with him and reading his stuff, things start happening for you personally, which is basically what a synchronicity is. So, you know, for me, Jeff and the people he's gathered around him were a real touchstone into looking at UFOs specifically and the experiences around them. Also, even more specifically, in a way that hadn't been done before, utilizing the tools and the methods of academia rather than what I'd been dealing with for, you know, the last 20 or 30 years, which is going to conferences and hearing people often talk about the same things over and over. And so, yeah, this was just kind of a gate to me to this kind of bigger area of what used to be an invisible college, but then at the conference was termed the visible college, which are people that are in academia and science and all this that are looking at these subjects seriously now. It's the biggest change I've seen in this field for myself anyway in years. In fact, the whole time I've been looking at it. And so that to me is it's very inspirational, and the conference was probably the best UFO, non-UFO conference I've been to so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, and can I add something real quick to what Greg was saying? You know, I think one of the things with this kind of current move in academia, it's taken a lot of work and a lot of different people sort of coming. I mean, Diana's book American Cosmic was a move, right? Like it was a very conscious effort to produce a work that bridged the gap between what's happening in academia and the universities and sort of that almost closed off area of scholarship and the public, and to build those bridges. And if you think about the people that she sort of writes about in there, sure, there's sort of anonymous figures in that, but there's also or pseudonymous figures in there, but there's also people that are active in the field, like Scott Brown, and different people that are out there in the public and talking about it. And it was a conscious effort to make that sort of play to open this up and to bring a sort of a type of public intellectual conversation that hasn't been around for a little bit. There's been this increasing divide and this increasing sort of this push away from the intellectual, the idea of the intellectual, the idea of the public intellectual. And right now we're at sort of a stage where there's just this heavy attempt, this really strong attempt to sort of bridge that gap. Jeff spoke on a thing today, a call for the Renaissance in the humanities, which is part of the Galileo Commission, which is not the Galileo Project. Galileo Commission is a different thing, talking about bringing consciousness studies into the humanities and sciences and into that. But it was interesting to hear this. They did it over a Zoom sort of webinar thing. And to hear it was very strange because in the United States, we don't have these kind of conversations. It was very British. It was very, people saying one must think this way, kind of stuff. But Jeff was there, and Jeff was presenting this idea that, yeah, in the university system, the kind of conversations that he wants to have are not being had. And in the public, the kind of conversations that I think we want to have aren't necessarily being had, and to build a space for that where there's a bridge between, and Smiles, that you kind of almost pointed this out where, like the spooks in the military, right? Like that there's these divides that we have in the subject. And, if you look at like Mike's work, the intimacy of the subject, right? Like it's not captured in a gun camera footage of a blurry UFO blob, just the intimacy of it, which isn't always, aliens and UFOs. It can be there's a whole range of experiences that go along with the phenomena. And so how do we build that conversation, and in a way that's fruitful? And that's what's really important, I think, about what Jeff is doing, what Diane is doing, Stephen Finley in his way, who Greg mentioned, Chris White, a lot of different people are really moving into that. And I think with the Archives of the Impossible, it was interesting to meet people that I hadn't necessarily met yet, that were within that circle and that conversation, and to see the effect that actually coming to terms to a certain extent with the phenomena and these experiences in their own lives, in experiencing it in their research and their scholarship, because there were academics there who were like, oh, wow, like there's a reality here which I didn't get until I had XYZ experience. And now, here's a place where I can have this conversation. I can't have this conversation in these other sort of dimensions of my life. And I think that
one of the academics actually said that to me.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
Sorry, David.
the last time I had anything approaching the level of sense of like being with that level of intellectual discourse that I've really been seeking was June 2001, Greg, when we were at the La Jolla Society for Scientific Exploration conference. And even then, though, it's still more like the nature of their journal, like a peer review kind of scientific presentation paper type of thing, more focused on, you know, experiments and replicability and that sort of thing. And, you know, this conference was so unlike it was not a UFO conference. Obviously it was not. There was no dealer's room with alien belt buckles and little UFO alien chocolates and
Unfortunately,
thank God. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could do
Well,
with
I
a
did get a
UFO belt
t-shirt
buckle.
though, so that's good.
I think some of us appreciate like the circus tent aspect, but also we really lament that it obviously goes against the grain. I mean, when you've got people in the lecture hall, experiencers, abductees, having retelling their traumatic or even transcendent experiences, and in the other room are these little curios that are making light of the cultural, pop cultural iconography of it all. Yes, that wasn't there. And like I say, it really reminded me of this other thing from gosh, I was going to say a decade ago, but it's longer. 2001, yeah, so like 12 or 22 years ago. So it really, for me, it was so amazing in that regard, and because they did really try to pack in so much. And what is odd to me is that it was less about the archive itself, though people like Valet and some of the other plenary speakers really tried to, in their talks, give those touchstones to like the relevance and importance of the archive that we're all here to celebrate the opening of. But at the same time, we need to talk about the experience itself and the people having these experiences. And you know, Mike, did you find it a good balance between the science, the academic, the experience, the archiving?
A good balance, you know, was so there was a handful of folks there, experiencers, and we sat at the bar together, and it felt like sometimes we were like this little closed off little crowd, you know, people who had the direct experience or have claimed the direct experience, let's say. And I found that you know, we were talking about it in very, very like, you know, this happened to me last month kind of stories, or this is what I'm going through right now. And it was very emotional, and so Whitley is very much part of that crowd. So he was up there on the stage giving a talk. But I found that there was a big divide for me, like between the smart people that were with PhD at the end of their names, or I don't want to say that, I'm not saying that like derogatory, but I'm saying that there was a gulf between people who studying the direct experience and people having the direct experience. And Whitley certainly bridged that gap at the event. But I found it a little bit, and we talked about it a little bit, the folks that were, you know, like, it's a little bit unsettling to have the direct experience and to feel, I don't want to say on the outs. That's too strong, but it's close. This conference I did not feel like I was on the outs at all, but I've definitely had that experience in other formats. So yeah, I definitely noticed that. And then I will also say, and I really want to be super cautious how I say this, that more people than I'm assuming, I knew a handful of people who were attending, who were in the role of the academic, let's say. I'd be really careful how I say that. And I either knew that they had firsthand experiences and were not talking about it in the circles. And that's fine. That's totally fine. That's totally completely understandable. And I understand why they would not want to talk about it. But so I've been very vocal about it. And part of the reason I've been so vocal about my own experiences is because I really didn't have anything to lose. I was drawing cartoons for a living. Like, I wasn't doing anything that was like, I'm not president of the bank. I'm not like a chair at some, you know, like I'm not in any position where my livelihood is threatened by coming forward with this. So I just, when it was time to come forward, it was like, well, I'm just doing it. Like, I'm not going to hold back because, like, I'm already, I said it earlier, like I'm doing this kind of lowbrow, like, I was drawing comics and cartoons and stuff like that. So I definitely noticed a divide between the very small circle of people who were always sitting together, and I was always part of that little circle, and then the rest of the folks at the event, and maybe that's just my own, like, there's kind of a built-in insecurity that comes with these experiences, right? Because you're not allowed to talk about them. They're socially taboo. They're synonymous with being insane, right? So that's like saying, oh, you've had UFO contact. That in most people's eyes, let's say that would be a synonym for mental illness. So it was a funny thing to be sort of editorializing. Then you add, having a few glasses of wine at the bar to that editorializing. It never got heated or anything like that, but we definitely recognized that there was a divide between the two people. Yeah, I did. I went for a long time and basically said only one thing. So,
well, I do think I'm going to acknowledge that in my conversations with others attending there, mostly non-experiencers, as far as I know, as far as they've revealed, maybe they've witnessed, a sighting or something. But I definitely got several people who I know said to me, kind of hush hush, like, I didn't. Did you understand that lecture or that panel dissection, or did you get anything out of that? And I could tell from the way they were asking the question, they did not. And I was like, yeah, I thought it was great. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll have to talk more about that. And then another person was like, that was too frou-frou, woo-woo, and what do you think they were talking about? The experiencer panel. And I'm like, I know that's why they're there, like, to some degree. And then I know some other panel participants who, after the event were kind of just like, there's really an agenda here, and I'm not sure I'm fully on board with it. And there is an agenda, and David and all of us, I think, have touched on it from our reading of Kripal, and he makes no bones about it. He's trying to start a revolution and reinvigorate the humanities as the super humanities, as he's described over and over again. And as he says, throughout all of his works, it's all kind of pushing this same agenda, which to me is not a negative thing, but I could see that some people who aren't on board with that might take it that way. But it is important that that people who've had these experiences, whether they're out of the closet about it or not, be made to feel comfortable. And I do feel like the military angle of the December 27th or 2017 onward revelations about the Pentagon aspect of this stuff has kind of reduced the laughter curtain, has made it more easy to talk about without the ridicule factor or the inevitable Twilight Zone, X-Files music, though people still do that because it's easy. But there's still a long way to go, and I think your comments speak to that, Mike.
I think too. I think part of it, it's sort of like it's like the conference thing. Like you're around the people you know. I know I spent most time with Greg and Eric Wargo because I know them. I know them as friends, so it was like hanging out with friends, and it would be interesting if they have another event like that, to at least with to some extent to have, and I hate to say this because I hate them, but some sort of ice-breaking thing or some sort of active means of introducing people, because I think, like with I met Jay King from the Experiencer group, and I only met him because he was on the panel with Greg and I and Cameron, and so it was I wouldn't have necessarily met him other than that, but he's awesome, and now since the conference and having met him, like I talked to him, and like he's great,
I'll interrupt that. It was Jay that I was at the bar drinking wine with, and we got
like, and so I didn't know him,
so he told me the same thing, Mike, actually.
Yeah, and so that I think that like if we had like an ambassador that went around and was like, oh, this is so and so, or like Matt, because I wouldn't have necessarily met Cameron, Hammond, who is a lecturer at Rice right now, who's doing some really interesting work on witchcraft. Would not have met her outside of her being on the panel, and she's awesome.
Yeah, and she got in there at the last second too.
Yeah, so that was, and it I think it would be interesting because there was a lot of time. I mean, and also with the experiencer group, like I personally didn't want to walk over there if people were having like deep conversations and be like, hey, yo, it was a great conference. Let's talk about some stuff. You know what I mean? Like, because like that was a chance for people to get together and have a moment, especially with Whitley there. Like, I didn't want to step in to any situation where Whitley's sitting there and take space away from people being able to ask him questions or do, instead of talking.
I would, and I'd listen to see how he was interacting with people. Because
absorb the wisdom. Yeah.
When Mike said this and Miles just now, I was thinking maybe the next conference is the experiencers run the conference and the academics sit in the audience and listen.
I mean, that's always an issue because like there's the
strict too. Go ahead.
There's been instances where I've been at conferences with the academic sort of scholar scientist experiencer split, and there's like a sense of almost like at points like lab rat kind of like let's observe the experiencer and see, and it sucks. I mean, it's not cool, and like I personally like live in a weird space because I've had experiences, not necessarily UFO experiences, but I've had weird stuff go on, and I sort of live in that space of just sort of weirdness. But it's not anything that's to the extreme point where I don't know, it's not as I guess it's
disruptive.
Yeah, it's not as disruptive, so to have that sort of like I'm a scientist or an academic staring at this phenomena and thinking about it and theorizing it, like it can get kind of weird. So that would, I mean, Greg, what you said, I think that would be awesome to have an experiencer run, and drag the academics and scholars in as the lab rats.
Yeah. You know what Jeff told me when I told him I thought I might want to go get pursue some sort of advanced degree. He said, what do you want to do that for? And I thought he would be encouraging. And what he said, which I think is quite relevant, and I'm not going to listen to him. I was still kind of want to pursue this, but he said, if you did this, you wouldn't have written something that was called Are UFOs a Cosmic Art Project? Because I'd written that, and apparently he'd liked that essay. And he said, if you had been tracked academically, those ideas would not have come to you. And I argued with him, and I said, yeah, if I was tracked academically from when I was about 20, 25 years old on a tenure track and all that, yeah, I think I probably could have been programmed into that mindset, which is what a lot of these academics at this thing are fighting almost. Just like, okay, we want to talk about this weird stuff. We want to stop bracketing ourselves. I really like that term that came out of the conference. I didn't know about it. Bracketing is when an academic or a researcher keeps themselves distant from the subject that they're studying so they can keep some sort of scientific what's it called, neutrality about it. And as Diana's book showed us, and Jeff's and everybody we've been talking about, if you want to get anything out of the subject and make any difference and affect anybody but 5 other academics, you have to stop bracketing. You have to admit that the subject you become involved with it, it has affected you, and that you are reflecting back and forth with that subject. Because that's when the communication of your sort of research makes a difference in people's lives and makes a difference to people outside of academia, which is what they're trying to do. And what David said about, and Miles too, about the New York Times article. I've been asked about that, and my reaction is, I think what that was, among other things, if you take the military thing out of it, was basically trying to crowdsource anomalies research. Make it not a stigma, so that people that were scared to talk before, from experiencers to researchers to everything, can all start having that conversation. And yes, there is a certain idea around what Jeff and Rice are doing and his graduate students are doing. But whether you agree with all of it or not. I don't agree with anything completely. I don't agree with the document people. I don't totally agree with what the experiencers tell me, even though I haven't had that experience. My perspective is different. Even the experiencers' perspectives are different. But everybody has their own group and their own people they resonate with. But they can all learn from each other. And I think they don't have to agree to be able to advance, understanding of things. And I just happen to resonate with this group at the AOI conference more than others. I had some great conversations across different disciplines and all that. And like I said, one of the academics I actually talked to yesterday, and he said after going to that conference, he says the spirituality aspect of this was awakened within me, and he's a scientist. So, I think, for all the criticism people might have of what the conference was, there's a lot of good being done by it. Just more conversation and more communication and less bracketing has to happen, as Mike was pointing out.
And Jeff talked about that to just real quickly, Jeff, to the point of the agenda idea. Jeff actually mentioned that on a call for a renaissance of the humanities, a reimagining of it. Today he was talking about how someone asked about agnosticism versus Gnosticism, right, in terms of an approach towards these topics. And Jeff said that agnosticism can be honest and it can be a true pursuit of thinking and experience, but right now, because of the current cultural situation, we need Gnosticism. We need a very careful Gnosticism, which is not being agnostic about the fact that these things happen, or agnostic about the fact that there's more going on here than just some sort of reductive materialist view of reality. Just because that's so ingrained in everything, the whole status quo of academia, the whole status quo of media, the whole status quo is ingrained in this very reductive view of what it means to be human. And that reductive view is destroying everything. That reductive view is basically causing, a global collapse. It's causing climate change. It's causing political disruptions. This reductive view is completely demeaning people's lives. One of Greg and my friend Jose Herrera, who was a student of Diana's, he's working on bringing psi research into helping with veteran suicides, right? Because the suicide rate in veterans is insane. It's crazy, and there's all sorts of reasons behind that. But part of it is just the enculturation of a sort of corrupted view of what it means to be alive and what it means to be human. And so Jeff's point, what kind of the push behind the agenda is, our view of life and humanity and the whole thing is not functional. It's not functional for the future. It's not functional for now. It hasn't been functional. And so what do we do to sort of change that? And it takes a drastic kind of push to do that. It takes a very focused forward push to do that, which is gonna offend some people that want to keep the agnosticism, that want to stand back and be academic and objective and indifferent to it. But Jeff's point is that the academy and the universities and the rest of that, it's not a sort of value neutral system. It produces the technology. It produces these kind of reductive thought patterns that are in the society. So, and his role at a leading institution as an academic is sort of to step forward and say, hey, this isn't right, that we got to change this, And he's the first one to admit that he doesn't say that he's right, or that he knows everything. It's just that this is what he can do, and he's doing it, and starting to build that conversation. And the experience and the phenomena are a part of that conversation, because it's such a core to being human, which has been turned into kind of a circus sideshow and a sort of joke for a lot of people.
It's been commodified like everything
Yeah.
else. So we obviously don't have an infinite amount of time, and we're trying to talk about an event that took place over many days, and there was so much. I did at least want to kind of, for those who haven't gone to the website, which if you want to see the schedule and the links to all the videos for all the presentations, they're all up there, more or less. Some of them don't have the Q&A afterwards, I suspect because of not everybody could get signed off on getting their image put onto the recording. But folks can go to impossiblearchives.rice.edu, and there's links there to all the presenters' bios and all the videos of the plenary sessions by the main speakers, as well as these fantastic panel discussions. I was honored to participate in the Archiving the Impossible panel that featured some folks from other archives that have special collections that deal with these kinds of paranormal or UFO related phenomena. But there are very few, like the Anomaly Archives, or in this case, the Archives of the Impossible, that were created to focus on that. And so that's pretty unique. But among the plenary speakers, we of course had these big donors of material like Jacques Vallée, Whitley Strieber, Leslie Keane, and these awesome professors, some of which, what's that?
Ed May.
Edmund May from the remote viewing research, and I'm drawing a blank on the UTSA professor. Is that Philip Santos, and the fellow who closed out the conference, whose name is eluding me at the moment. But these were each, I totally enjoyed. Sebastiano, I really enjoyed all of these talks. Obviously, everybody has a very different speaking style, and the topics were varied. I think a lot of people were very surprised. There's a lot of people who still don't know that Leslie Keane has gone into that obsession with spiritualism, and the person she was talking about is one of the donors, Stuart Alexander, who's this physical medium, and I know there's that to some people's to some people that's too gauche or something. It's just like, I thought we were past all the physical medium stuff, but I still found it fascinating, and was very glad that it was included as part of the presentation. But these are panel discussions. Of course, Greg and David were part of the Impossible in Public Cultures, if I'm remembering the title of that.
Public Cultures in the Impossible.
Yes, and of course, the Experiencing the Impossible, which was featured people who've had experiences with these strange phenomena, like Annalisa Ventola, Elizabeth Crone, Gail Hussick, Paul Smith, the remote viewer, and Shravana. I'm gonna butcher her last name, but Shravana. These were all very interesting. I'm curious if there were any standout presentations, whether it be the plenary sessions or the particular panel discussions that you each really enjoyed, or maybe the opposite. Maybe you thought was just like, why did they even include this, or I didn't get anything out of it, or it was interesting, but I don't know what they were saying, because there was definitely some of that for me.
You just mentioned the Experiencing the Impossible one. And that one actually stood out to me because Annalisa Ventola, I first met her at a Parapsychology Association, Parapsychological Association conference. And she's the executive director for the Parapsychological Association. And I had no idea that she had had those experiences. Because in parapsychology, despite studying the psychic functioning and that kind of thing, it's not always apropos to present that you actually have those experiences. So that was pretty amazing to see her up there presenting that. Sravana, she actually speaks at Harvard. She's one of a Rice graduate who now teaches at Harvard. And I thought that was really awesome to see her up there and talking about her experience, because that again, it's that bridging that gap, Gail Husick, I was really interested in because she has essentially a sort of psychic detective agency, which to me, that's just fun. I don't, not to demean what she does, but I think it's I'm really fascinated by the ability, to bridge the business world and to bridge, sort of to have a company that's focused around these areas, not necessarily commercializing it, but utilizing it in a way that is functional enough to sort of exist in that space. That's awesome. So, that one I got a lot out of, just because I, surprised Annalisa, happy, when Sravana was up there as a Harvard, professor speaking to this. I thought that was awesome. I think that I would have liked to have seen Mike on an experiencer panel and have like an experiencer panel and not like a surprise experiencer panel, because I know like Paul Smith, he's a remote viewer, he's an Army remote viewer, and he's experienced these things. But I don't know. I think next round, Mike, we should push for you to chair a panel of of something like that. But that, I mean, that
Jay King was on one of those. Jay King was on one of those panels, the experiencer panel.
Yeah, he was on our panel, on the public discourse panel.
Okay, that's right, because he was
maybe he should have been on the Experiencing the Impossible.
Well, I thought I thought it was nice to have him blended into ours, talking about how the experiencer group sort of helps have that function in the public of bringing people together and having that network. Mm-hmm. I thought that was cool to hear that, but I like none of the experiences on the experiencer panel, maybe Sravana's, but like were as strong as something, like the kind of stuff that you cover, Mike, is like much more like, whoa, like, okay.
Well, that's part of the reason I'm out of the loop, is in a lot of ways, is because the stuff I cover is like, I mean, on the continuum of weirdness, right? That's like this much, and then the weird end is out there, and it stretches out, and that's the stuff I'm most interested in, is the stuff that's totally bizarre, and that's the stuff that is kind of poison in the minds of a lot of, in polite conversation, you want to avoid that stuff.
That's why we need
as Carla Turner said, the answer is going to be in the anomalous details, and I still carry that with me.
Exactly. Maybe not the answer, but
experiencer.
Well, a path to an understanding is going to lie in the anomalous details that people throw out. I've been actually encouraging people that work with abductees to let them speak and not speak until they are finished in many ways. So you don't start tracking them in a way that they would be, I am a UFO investigator and I'm here to hear about your UFO experience. Well, the entire culture gives you a framework for that. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, if you try to track people into frameworks, they're going to keep talking about the same thing and not what happened to them. There was a point I wanted to make about this, about the conference. I go to UFO conferences. When I see experiencers or abductees or whatever people talk, witnesses, they can have completely divergent, nothing in common experiences, yet they both know that they're talking about something that only they can know. And that connection happens immediately. And I found that at the conference too, just about everybody was interested in the same thing, but all from these different viewpoints and paths and all that, but they all knew they were talking about the same thing. And I think that's something that has to be recognized, especially when people are dealing with experiencers, that their story is going to be much different than you want it to be, or that you might want to hear. And so, like I said, I've actually been pushing abduction researchers to kind of look at that and place the experiencer first, whether it advances, the researcher's agenda or not. And that if you stand out of the way of people trying to describe and deal with what happened to them, you might learn something if you let them just talk. And so that's kind of, I think Mike would kind of agree with that approach.
Oh yeah. And then, so there's a friend of mine, I won't use his name, but I'll use his name, Bill Konkowski. He's an experiencer, and he's been very vocal and open about his experiences and written a few books. And he has this funny story where he goes to a party and he's with his wife, and someone says, "Hey, Bill, what's up with this UFO stuff?" His wife will immediately push him aside and and say, "Do you got 6 hours?"
Exactly.
So yeah, so that's kind of the thing. You're not going to find out anything until after about 6 hours of conversation. Like, you're going to then only you're going to like get to that kernel of or get to that, the painting will start to fill in,
Yeah.
all the details.
Instead of seeing 4 paint maps
at
here,
about 6 hours.
that are the bright ones that you want to see, the entire rest of that painting is not revealed. And I think the researchers too, I think Valet made this point years ago, you have to form a relationship with somebody that this has happened to, so that you can kind of get a bigger, more nuanced picture of what's going on. Because when you first meet somebody, they're not going to tell you everything that happened to them. They're scared to. But a week, a month, a year down the line, they'll start to reveal things where you go, oh, okay, I see what you're talking about. It didn't happen to me, but I can understand the vast amount of change that happened to you because of this. But yeah, that only comes with time and honesty and trust and things like that. And that's not built over, one session or 2 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he's commented.
Sorry.
He's commented before about the idea that the witness is going to withhold the most strange aspects, and it does take that long period of time where they slowly reveal those things to you as they gain more and more trust and affinity with the research.
And Jeff Kripal speaks beautifully to this, where he says, the problem with doing this research, I'm paraphrasing, I quoted him in a book. It was from a podcast he did, but I'm quoting him poorly now. But he said the problem with this research is that the more you dig into it, it's not converging to make more sense. It makes less sense. The deeper you dig into it, the less sense it makes. So when you talk to someone who's had these experiences, the more you talk to them, the puzzle pieces don't fit together more cleanly. They end up getting pulled apart, where things get more bizarre. Instead of, they'll tell you a surface story that makes a little bit of sense and maybe will fit into your the way you frame the mystery, right? They'll tell something that a nuts and bolts researcher could nod and understand. But as you talk to them more, it gets you're going down to a deeper level. It's getting deeper and deeper. It's getting weirder and weirder, where they tell you stories that are so weird, and they keep getting weirder, and it makes it more difficult to understand. And that's the problem with the direct experience, is that it defies simple categorization, and it also defies complex, mysterious, boundless categorization, where it gets very elusive, and the details get more and more slippery the deeper you delve into it.
Yeah, I had conversations with a few people before and after the conference about, and I've had these conversations for a while, how the hell do you quantify a qualitative experience for a database? That's a question for a maybe a psychologist or psychiatrist, but still, this is not, this is more a question, like Jeff is saying, this is more almost a question for humanities than for the hard sciences or even the soft sciences. So it's a very tough nut to crack. And like I said, I think letting people talk to the point where you're just going, how the hell did this even happen to you? They're just, as Mike said, they're things that people would not make up even if they had a lifetime to do it. And you're just going, what? But the thing is, listening and recording these things in some way, maybe that will help in a greater understanding of what's going on. Because I think what's going on with you, Mike, and the people that have written to you is so beyond categorization that a categorization just kills it. It trying to categorize anything about it just kills any growth you would have into understanding it. And so, the act of looking for an answer just basically, it just stops it stops the living experience cold.
And I've given up
experiencer.
Sorry.
I've given up looking for an answer. Like I've long ago given up looking for an answer because I am like the flavor and the mood of a story, right? So like a parable or a myth or a folk tale, can tap into you on a different level than a pragmatic dissertation.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm more interested in sharing the stories, letting those percolate in some mysterious part of our hidden consciousness or our subconscious, as opposed to trying to tap into the forefront, the logical part of the brain. And I'm much more trying to tap into the illogical and mysterious and art. Well, basically, I'm treating it as an art project in a way. Yeah. So I'm treating it like art.
Right brain research. I've totally been pushing for right brain research for a few years now because I think that's been ignored.
Exactly.
And what people. I was talking to Whitley during the conference, and he was talking about stuff that had happened to him recently. And I said, "It sounds like the visitors are throwing art at you." And he said, "That's it. I'm going to use that."
Yeah. And
his lecture was very much about like contextualizing a letter from describing an experience of a witness in a family of witnesses in a mythological context, and there's no UFO in that story other than some vague reference to lights, but that to me was a very powerful presentation where he explicated his interpretation of what did he overlay the whole Minotaur mythos onto this family's experience, but. And it's pretty strange. It's just like he was describing, it escalated to more and more strangeness to the point where it really had some deleterious effects on the family.
Yeah, it is a Minotaur leading you into a maze, and you don't know. This is what the feeling I got from it. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, so I was like, I have been a couple things. So one is that I've been looking at these experiences, trying to analyze real life experiences the same way a Jungian analyst would try to decipher a dream. Right? So look at a real life experience and analyze it as if it were a dream. That has been very helpful in my research. People will tell me these wild owl stories that don't make any sense logically. They are speaking in dream language. Right. So the shaman goes on a mystical journey. He takes ayahuasca, or he dances all night, or he locks himself in the cave for 48 hours or something. And he comes back with this trippy, illogical story, an account. His shamanic journeying plays out in dream language or psychedelic language and that's the mystery. I think these events are playing out in that dream logic, where someone like Elizabeth Crone, who got had a near-death experience by being hit by lightning just a few hundred yards from the venue. She, like, the near-death experience is a perfect example of that dream realm. Like it's like in a timeless realm. It doesn't match our time. It doesn't match our reality at all. You are lifted outside of this reality. You are in some other reality. Most often people will say that reality is more real than real. It is beyond our reality. It feels more vital, more important, more vivid, more colorful, more like like people say they can see 360 degrees in these, in like an
Yeah.
out of body experience like that. So they're not like
The
seeing
most
forward over it.
the most personal thing that can ever happen to you.
Yes, and then how do they come back, and then they have to make sense of that. That's
and
that's the
then
mystery of
language, they're
illusion.
going,
Because often it's telepathic, yeah. So the communication is all immediate. Like people come back. It's not uncommon for people to come back from near-death experiences, and it's less common in the UFO contact experience, where they'll come back and basically plainly say, "I understood everything in the universe. I understood it all." They come back here and they say, "Well, it just like it doesn't. The fabric of this reality, I can't tap into it anymore. But in that reality, I understood everything in the entire universe." So that's the level of weirdness that people are being subjected to, as opposed to, you know, how big was the UFO at arm's length kind of thing. So
I think about that scene in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where to punish somebody, they let them see what the entire history. They let them see reality from the beginning of time to the end in one big flash, and it fries their brain.
Yeah,
it's called the total perspective vortex, and it sounds like, sort of an analogy to what happens to people during these experiences. They get this total perspective, and they're just like, their mind's blown, but they can't communicate it to anybody except somebody else that might have had that experience.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where that's the camaraderie that shows up in these conferences. And that's what I'm hungry for. Like, I'm hungry to sit at the bar with the other experiencers and just have that close camaraderie. And also, this is a weird thing. I just had a long conversation with a woman, I won't use her name, but she had a powerful, wild, impressive near-death experience. And we talked, and I haven't had a near-death experience, and she hasn't had a UFO experience. We talked and we talked and we talked. She said, it feels so nice to connect like this. It just really feels like, you're like, we both of us said, oh yeah, it's really great to connect, but it's two diametrically, not opposite, but divergent categories of the paranormal, right? She's had a near-death experience. I've had UFO experiences, but yet we just bonded. It's such a, like, we both thought, oh, I understand.
The door opened for both of you, but they were different doors.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and you got to mention Omega Project, the wonderful work.
Yes.
On somebody author who's the writer.
Kenneth Ring. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Kenneth Ring. He was this near-death experiencer researcher. And then, somebody puts Whitley Strieber's Communion on his desk, and he's just like, it's a bridge too far, man. Like, I'm already, dealing with people not respecting me and ridiculing my work because I'm dealing with the afterlife, or this experience that seems to intimate that. And lo and behold, that work seems to show so much overlap of those seemingly diametrically opposed incidents. And here we are, 20 years. Well, so many decades after, the kind of the real massive rise of the abduction phenomena into popular consciousness, and there's so much now more a discourse on the connection to death and the dead. And I mean, in some ways, it seems as simple as indigenous cultures have always interacted with non-corporeal beings that sometimes identify themselves as being the ancestors. But there's this real renaissance almost of acceptance, or at least a discussion of it. But I did just want to, again, comment on what y'all were saying earlier about the fact that the experiencer panel, Experiencing the Impossible, was kind of a little lopsided. Poor Paul, the only guy on the panel, and he was the one who had, as I think David was saying, had chosen to have his experiences, whereas I believe everybody else, I don't remember exactly what Gail Husick's origin story was as far as the founding of the development of her psychic experiences that led to her doing that investigation organization. But yeah, most everybody else, it was just kind of those spontaneous experiences. Or surprise experiences, as you say.
Well, and that really, Sirvana actually has cultivated practice in Tantra and some of the Indian. I'm forgetting exactly what school she's a part of, but she's been initiated since she was 8, I think, or 10. in practice. So in Shakti Tantra. So, she's been cultivating esoteric practices in Shakti Tantra since she was a young girl. So that's where her experiences kind of focus around.
And her experience that she related, if I'm remembering correctly, was seemed almost outside the realm of that training. I mean, obviously that would have prepared her to some degree, but it more reminded me of what I was alluding to earlier with Stuart Alexander, the physical medium, in terms of like apports, like this. If I'm remembering, it was a ring that she kept hung around her neck, and then she kind of went into an altered state of consciousness, and then suddenly was looking at the ring inside of I believe an urn or a glass urn of ashes at a former concentration camp. I mean, just like off the charts, intense, wild, like the last thing I was expecting to hear on that kind of a panel, but very, very interesting range of experiences there. So the one panel that I didn't get to see fully in person because I overslept. I was catching up on sleep. Was the morning session that was the science of the impossible, which I've now rewatched from the beginning and realized where I came into the auditorium that morning. And that's one that had Eric Wargo and I
Masters.
have to mention. Was it Christopher White, Eric Wargo, Aaron Prophet, Michael Masters, and Stanislav Panin? I really enjoyed this talk, and obviously, as somebody who originally, I guess, like a lot of folks, came at these things wanting to know the mechanics of it, as an old RPG gamer, I'm like, help me understand the physics of the universe so that we can, we can be all dungeon masters and master our domains, but. In some ways, this was a very much more like frontiers of physics kind of discussion that really, I think, just goes to this sense of there being revolutions in progress. And I actually harken back to Valet's lecture where he talks about, if you go over to the math department, there's some trouble brewing, and this idea that was brought up about the crisis and replicability of scientific experiments. And I loved when Ed May in the audience pipes up and he goes, yeah, everywhere except in parapsychology. But we can't go by without referencing Eric Wargo's, I think he attributed some comments to David about the conference imagery with the owl eyes and retrocausality, which David, did you really say something to that effect about it possibly being the seed?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's weird because in the 2011 thing and writing about Esalen and the Center for Theory and Research, it's been weird to get to know Jeff and like Diana and all of that, and that was kind of the experience I had listening to Mike on Whitley's podcast, where I realized that like as a kid I had seen Whitley's book, I'd seen Communion and it was at a sort of transitory point in my life. And we moved to Arizona and I had a bunch of experiences with owls. Like I was allowed to wander the desert as a kid because, it's a lot of desert out there. So like, just like hanging out and stuff. And I found like these culverts sort of like, like the connecting spaces in a sewer system. Well, they were building different, they were building the suburbs of Glendale at the time. And so there were just areas of desert which would have just parts from where they were putting in sewers and all that. And there was this one connecting piece that the owls had sat on and they were dropping all their pellets into it. So it was just filled with bones. So as a kid, I would just like go out there and like you get out of the sun and like, oh, there's a bunch of animal bones and mouse skulls and stuff. And this is weird. So I'd be sitting in this like owl depository, and it was around the time that I was seeing the Communion book all over the place. It was 1987 and the book's like, it's everywhere. which actually I found out how much everywhere it is more recently. Chris Corey, a friend of mine, actually picked up one of the display pieces that Avon had put out, which had all these different pins that says "We are here," and it's got the communion face on it, you know. But anyway, so all of that like sort of existing in the back of my mind, and then 2009 comes around. I make this blog that's, you know, vaguely named Owl, about an owl kind of thing. And Mike has his blog out. I was talking to Mac Tonys at the time.
Oh, so was I. Yes. Oh gosh, we all have connections with Mac Tonys. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was just like, it was really interesting to hear you talking to Whitley about this stuff. And I'm like, oh, like that was, you know, all connecting up in a weird way. And it was formative for me because it was when I discovered Jacques Vallée's work really in depth and started engaging with that. And I actually had some like weird kind of like not like craft UFO experiences, but other experiences which were sort of like that around that time. Fast forward to when Supernatural comes out, and I started having like, I had a direct encounter with like a sizable owl that blocked my path one day. I mean, it was like,
keep going.
It was sitting on the ground. We were about to pull out, and this is when I was having these kind of strange experiences around the Supernatural coming out. The owl like sits on the ground, and I mean, the thing was, it was over 2 feet tall. You know, it was a sizable owl. You know,
a big owl,
and it was
yeah.
like a barred owl, and it's just sitting there in the afternoon, like on the ground. It won't move. And I'm like, I'm not going to run over an owl, you know. So I'm like, well, all right, I guess I'll get out of the car and like kind of shoo it, you know, like you got to go away and hope I don't get like attacked or something. You know, I'm like, I don't know what this owl's going to do when I approach it. And it just sits there. It just stands there staring at me. And I was like, this is really weird. Like, this is an odd experience. And like, I approached it to maybe like 3 feet, and the thing just sat there. And I was like, this is freaking weird, you know. And then it eventually flew up into a tree and then started watching me. We drove out, and a day or two later my car died, like completely, like it just broke down completely, and then led to a whole series of weird kind of stuff with that. But then, you know, I mean, the Supernatural has the owl eye on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and all of that. And I just thought that and so my conversation, and ironically, the piece I wrote about the Supernatural had a picture I had taken of branches, and it was black and white. And Mike, at the time you commented, you were like, oh man, that's just like the cover
that was
of my book.
That was you. This is all coming back now. Got it. Yeah, that was you. Okay, I remember
like,
I had this conversation
the cover
with
of my
someone
book. And I hadn't even thought of that. I was like, oh wow, it is. It's like all like, this is all a weird blend. Because I'd written about the sort of time displacement I had. Because the thing listening to you on the Whitley show was literally, I was standing there and suddenly like the bottom dropped out on my mind. And like my whole history was just this line. You know, it was like living Eric Wargo's like 4-dimensional being, where like I was standing in my life now, but seeing through my eyes as a kid, and it wasn't a memory. Like, it was very physical, and it was strange. So talking to Eric, I talk to Eric all the time, and I was just sort of joking around with him, and I was like, you know, the fact that Rice has this owl, people are commenting on that. People have been talking about, oh, the Rice owl and all that. I'm like, doesn't that kind of seem time loopy? You know, almost as if the Rice owl here, you know, provides this continuity, because this Archives of the Impossible is bringing together all these different groups, and it's this sort of hub now where everybody's getting together, people are meeting in person in ways that we haven't, like we're having conversations that we haven't had, although we've all been sort of floating in the same space. It's really like a kind of nexus point. And I was like, so isn't it interesting, you know, that I had the thing. And then when Eric and I were walking we had met up with Jeff on the first day, and we talked a little bit with him. And then Mike, you came up and we talked to you for a second. And then you and Jeff walked to the conference center. Eric and I are walking to go look at the display, the conference display at the library. And an owl starts going off. And it was like, I mean, it was early afternoon. And it was on Rice campus, and like this, like an owl starts going off, and both Eric and I like stop, and we're like, "Is that an owl in the early afternoon on campus, like right here?" And you know, Mike, you had asked like, "Was it a dove?" And like, no, it wasn't a dove. It was You know, it was like an owl, barred owl, kind of like distinctive hooting. And I was just like, and both Eric and I were like, what? And I was like, well, we met Mike, so obviously, you know, the owls are going to come. But
Rice University's mascot is Sammy the Owl. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's their, you know, like you showed, like, you got that the owl eye, you know. I mean,
so just to be fair, like an owl is an appropriate mascot for a college, right? Owl is Athena, the goddess Athena was the goddess of wisdom and commerce, and so that makes sense that there would be an owl mascot at an institute of higher learning. So, but the story you just told is, and I've got to be very careful to say this because that yes, I'm less. It didn't serve me to be shocked by these stories that you're telling me, so I'm not shocked, but I am still in awe of these kinds of stories, exactly what you just shared. And what you also did, which is you kind of the complexity, like it wasn't a simple story, right? It wasn't just A plus B gets to C. It was like it like went all around the block multiple times. You know, like it feels like when you start pulling on the thread, every other thread in the tapestry gets somehow engaged in the same mystery.
Yeah, that's exactly. And that's kind of what, you know, it's interesting you were talking about the actual experiences don't fit like a narrative structure, right? Like it's not the different forms of the story that we can tell that have the Aristotelian curve and the, you know, there's story structures which are obvious, right? And that there's an interesting book on phantom hitchhikers which actually points this out, because when a folklorist went to look at the phantom hitchhiker phenomena, what he found was that there were the legends, you know, kind of the urban legends of the phantom hitchhiker, and then there were people's experiences with phantom hitchhikers, and the two didn't meet up. There was the urban legend, the kind of story that people spin around their experience because it makes sense. But when you talk to them about their experience don't have an easy beginning and an easy end and a sort of loop. And, oh, it was, you know, then I went to the house and I found out that this person had died, and, you know, this kind of narrative structure. And the narrative structure sometimes is overlaid on someone's experience because it's so weird that there's no other way to sort of work with it other than, oh, we're going to try to make this make sense. You know, that someone died on this road 10 years ago, so it's probably that person. And, you know, they start to backtrack and backfill the narrative when the actual experience itself is very strange, you know.
Possibly the book.
That's exactly the book. Yeah, that is exactly the book.
What's the book?
Michael Goss's
Evidence for Phantom Hitchhikers.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've got to get that one. It reminds me, as you two were talking, and it's a very short comment, that when I interviewed Dean Radin in the mid to late 90s, he said one of the quotes I remember from him is, he said, "It seems like meaning is a dimension," which is kind of the basis of synchronicity and all this. But I mean, it's the we have to consider, you know, our conscious and subconscious connections as part of this, and we, you know, that's why art and the humanities speak to that part of the brain and that part of human experience. And as David said, we're so enchanted by technology and materialism because it allows us to talk here and fly to the moon and see pictures from from the surface of Mars and all that. But it doesn't explain why you fall in love, or that. The one thing I keep saying when people say, "Why do you believe Whitley Strieber?" And I say, "Why do you believe the Beatles? Why do you believe Van Gogh?" It's not. This is not a. It's not a direct. It's not a direct connection question. It isn't anymore, and it has to be looked at in that way. And unfortunately, that's not how we deal with things. We just think art is this fun thing that we do, and that, well, at least society does. It's like, oh, that song's pretty, or I really like that movie, or whatever. It's like, well, you don't realize what's going on there, why you like that movie. It's because, or that piece of that poetry, or whatever it is. It's because it's speaking to you somewhere that you can't verbalize. And the kind of experiences Mike talks about, and all the people who have communicated with him and Whitley, these are all extremely crude attempts to describe what has happened to somebody. And the only way to see this is through an oblique viewpoint, where you listen to what they say, but you don't interpret exactly what somebody's saying. You have to listen to what they're trying to mean at you. And there's no way to do that except to what's the word, to listen without a blinder on and without trying to reason and figure out what somebody's trying to tell you when they do have these kind of experiences. That's not what's going on. What's going on is like what the astronauts have what's that called? The overview experience, where and I think Joseph Campbell called it aesthetic arrest. When you're confronted by something that is just so powerful to your personality and your subconscious and your sense of being that it affects it on a deep level. Mm-hmm. So maybe the UFO experience, the closer you get to something, the closer the encounter is, the more of an aesthetic arrest you may be experiencing. So I'm kind of talking around it, but that's all you can do with language. Exactly. Another thing from Radin, he told me it's using language to describe these things. It's like using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. So it's a difficulty, but the fact that we can talk about it on this level is for me very encouraging. And my only training is in art history, so I'm trying to worm my way into the subject in that way, rather than trying to be analytical about it, or at least analytical in the way that classically analytical is, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what was going on at this conference that really inspired me, is that basically huge swaths of the right and left brain were getting together and trying to talk to each other, and the conference was acting like a little corpus callosum and trying to facilitate conversation between those two halves, between the humanities and the sciences. And I think that's happening more, and I think that's a very important part of the future of this subject.
It's essential.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know what y'all got out of the para-ecologies panel discussion. This featured Anna Louise Keating, Simon Cox, Stephen Finlay, Christine Skolnick, and Sam Stolce. This to me was the most academic, easy language type panel discussion of all the panel discussions. It just seemed like, all these grad students using all the verbiage that I'm like, I think I know what they mean. But I really enjoyed it. And from the moment I saw something describing itself as para-ecology, I was very fascinated, because I've often been enamored with people like Terence McKenna and others talking about the ecology of souls that's encountered in the DMT experience. And I tend to have one of my favorite ideas about the UFO phenomena is this Gaian UFO hypothesis, that somehow we're interfacing with a ecosystem of hierarchies of consciousness, the not just the collective unconscious of the human species, but the collective consciousness of other species on the planet, whether it's the insect kingdom, all of them with their agenda for getting us to stop committing insecticide, or all these things I find resonant with this idea of a hive mind. None of that was part of this discussion, but there were some very interesting perspectives there. And having heard interviews with Stephen Finlay, I think on Greg's show is probably the first place I may have heard, or I'm misremembering. I really found that a very interesting conversation. Have y'all interacted with any of the particular panel participants of that, besides Stephen, maybe?
No, I think Greg and I are friends with Stephen, but
Go on.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm reading to see their names.
So I during that panel, I actually did this little thing where I started counting on my fingers, like the words I didn't understand. Like, I don't know what's that. Well, that's a good word. And there was like one sentence where I think I got to 5 words that I didn't understand, and I was like, yeah, I'm like, this is so. And then that's the trouble with academia, right? So academics write so other academics can read their academic thing, and everyone else is left out of it. Yeah. So that's one of the things I give both Diana and Jeff a lot of kudos for, is like writing in a more accessible way. I mean, their books, especially the Flip, I thought was written in a way that non-academics could really enjoy, as well, and Mutants and Mystics. But and then so there was one night I was walking out, and there was a fellow Tim. Was Tim on that panel? He was one of the people that spoke at the very end, but I don't know if he was on that panel.
No, he wasn't.
Oh, Tim Grieve Carlson.
Yeah. But he spoke at the very end.
Yeah.
So he kind of like sheepishly said, "Oh, Mike, I'm using your book for part of my PhD treatment." And I'm like, "What? You are? My book? Me?" Like, okay, that's like, and so we talked, and then all of a sudden the courtyard, the sun was setting and everyone was leaving, and then him and a bunch of people who were half my age or more said like, "Oh, we're all going to dinner." And I kind of looked right and left. I'm like, "Hey, can I join you?" And so I ended up going to dinner with those folks, and it was so fun. It was so fun. It felt so like, however kind of like, I don't posturing they were. I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but they were in their role on that panel. They were not in that role at the Thai restaurant when we were having dinner. So it was tons of fun, and it was a big relief for me to like just to realize that they were, these are 20-year-olds that are having that college kids and out at the local haunt and stuff. Yeah, so just felt great.
Yeah, David and I went to lunch with those people right after too, because we knew some of them through Jeff, so we actually hadn't gotten a chance to talk. And as soon as you get, even the academics that are PhDs and all that, when they get outside of that room where they have to speak in that way, they start speaking in normal language. Mm-hmm. And that in concept, it's the same concept, but it's in language that's not academese, which kind of scares me about having to go further with an academic career. Is I'm going to have to learn how to speak academese, and it's going to affect the way I think. But that panel, I had the same thing. I was listening, and I pretty much understood what they were talking about, but I had to think while they were talking. So it made it a little bit more difficult for me, or it was a little bit more effort to understand what they were getting at and how they were saying, well, things need to change, and things need to change in academia, and things need to change because it's going to have very specific real-world consequences if we don't get through this growth period and this period of very needed change. So, it's either going to be a bunch of conflict trying to change everything, or just a bunch of conflict with everything falling apart. Unless we start addressing these parts of our experience and these parts of the human experience and understanding that people generally discount. And, like an indigenous culture, it's just part of who they are and how they discuss things. Mm-hmm. You could show them a video game and explain it to them. They could probably understand what was going on at some level. But if they explained to you what their worldview was, you'd have to sit there for a few weeks just to sort of kind of try to get it. And we don't have that. And so there's this big divide. And I think that was if I'm not mistaken, I think that was one of the main themes of that panel.
It seemed like a lot of it had to do with, like, here, the lopsided nature of our panelists, us four here, where, four older guys, more or less, and no women. There were a number of women in attendance and part of the panel discussions, and I thought that so much of that para-ecology discussion hinged on those same issues that our society is grappling with right now, in terms of just recognizing the systemic racism and colonialist perspectives that exist. And I really got a lot out of Stephen Finley's Afro pessimism. I thought that was a very apt, and wanting to, even when I think Paul Smith at some point in the Q&A, maybe it wasn't that panel discussion, but alluded to it in so much as like, I'm hearing this kind of like burn it all down, type of approach to the paradigm, when, Kuhn and his book on the changing paradigms of science was more thinking of it in terms of incrementalism. But obviously for a lot of people, the status quo for so long is
tired of waiting,
not very good for them. Yeah.
Well, and
I think there's definitely some of that in our sense of this conference itself. It's like, let's get on with it. Let's take it to that next level.
Well, and I think that's an interesting thing that Stephen and some other scholars, Pico Mandala Gray, who writes with Stephen and who is another student from Rice, he's now teaching. But the Afro-pessimism and that's a whole philosophical movement. Like that's actually like a movement of thought. But it's really highlighted in some of the things that Stephen's pointed out, in the fact that, where is blackness, where's black culture in ufology, right? I mean, like, it's Betty and Barney Hill, sort of, it's an interracial relationship during a period in time where that's tense, and that's sort of brought out in some discussion of it. But where are black people's experiences with UFOs, right? Like, where is, we have sort of like Artie Six Killer Clark, right, with the First Nations experiences with UFOs. But and some people will talk about Sun Ra, but if you actually go into Sun Ra's experience, like, there's this whole world there, there's this whole realm of viewing the phenomena that exists. There's a lot of weird sort of coinciding cultural things with George Clinton and the mothership connection, and that happens at a really interesting time period in the 70s when SETI is beginning, and there's a lot of what I've been presenting on recently has been on the star children and starseed phenomena and the history of that. And Sun Ra and George Clinton and some other folks sit right within that, right? Like the Nation of Islam concept of the scientist who creates the white race and has this thing. So there's this whole sort of alternate ufology, alternate paranormal tradition. The dreaming tradition in African American cultures exists in a way that where precognitive dreams are not a thing. Like, it's not something that you question. It just happens. It's just the way you exist with your dream life. And that's never talked about in parapsychology. There's some specific articles on it, but I mean, there's enough where you can say like, oh, there's 10 articles on this topic. There's all this talk about we're rediscovering lucid dreaming and dream work and all this stuff, and Tibetan lucid dream yoga and that kind of stuff. But then there's a whole black tradition. There's a whole like dreaming and black culture in African American and African cultures that's never talked about, And so it was interesting on that panel, because that was like a small boat sitting on this massive ocean of, we've got a lot to change. And so that feeling of burn it all down, it goes into the experiencer thing. I mean, the fact that like the whole thing is talking about archives of the impossible and the impossible, and yet folks who have experiences feel like they're kind of off on the side of it, right? I mean, that's those kind of feelings, like that kind of thing, because it's again sort of this Gnostic agenda here. It's that we gotta change. We gotta change ourselves. We gotta change how we interact with each other. There's all these structural changes that need to happen to be able to do what parapsychology claims it's trying to do, or what anomalistics claim it's trying to do, Fortean, the whole paranormal research, any of that. Like, it's all got to change because the phenomena is so intimate and complex, and we haven't there's these very basic, just human relationships that we haven't been able to bridge.
If we can't understand each other, how can we understand this thing that's coming from supposedly outside of us?
Yeah, which is also teaching us, though, right? Like, it's teaching us to go beyond that stuff. That was something I found really fascinating with looking at the history of the starseed and idea, was that Ingo Swann, I think, put it really succinctly when he said that when we think about the ET, the extraterrestrial, the other, we rethink ourselves because we're rethinking this relationship. And, there's a lot of writing on that from the 70s and that about, and now as well. I mean, it goes forward, but just this, when we put that other in there and that relationship with the other, you start to rethink what it means to be human, and it expands the human into this other realm. It's like it starts to open it up more, and I think that's kind of the burn it all down, because the academy and all these sort of status quo, they'll be replaced. If we actually achieve this, communication with the cosmos, with the wider kind of vision, if we actually achieve this conversation with other humans, with ourselves, it's going to change.
It'll be irrelevant.
Yeah. What's that?
It'll make all that stuff irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, it'll
expose it as irrelevant.
Yeah. So I think that, which is also interesting in terms of the academic ease, because that will also be dropped. Like that too will go away, So, but yeah, I think that, I don't know. In some ways, I feel the burn it all down. I might be on that side to some extent.
I definitely resonated with it a little myself. So we're down to the last 15 minutes here, and like I've already said, we obviously can't cover everything, and maybe we'll do this again and have some other folks that were participants or attendees to discuss, and maybe get a little bit more diverse perspectives. But if I want y'all to have a chance here, and is there anything that we haven't said today about this event, or maybe it's your reflection on it now, a month and a half later, or if there was something particularly poignant in one of the presentations or panel discussions that you want to make sure that we get in here before we end it in about 13 minutes.
So in the morning, at the hotel, there's a coffee shop, and it was either Ed May or Paul Smith. I think it was Paul Smith. So Paul Smith's standing there getting coffee, and Jacques Vallée comes around the corner, and Jacques Vallée kind of goes, and then he goes like this to Paul Smith. And it was just this, like, obviously these guys have known each other since the 70s. And it was just this little moment of, like, here's this, I mean, I have Jacques Vallée's in his 80s and still doing good work, amazing work. And it was just this really touching moment where, like, wow, there's like, so that's like I'm not going to burn it all down just because those two people have obviously done a lot of hard work, and it was really touching moment for me. It was sweet, he was being playful and having fun, and it was just a nice way to say hello from across the room, in essence. So I just thought that was great. So that's what I got from it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the highlight, were the mornings when everybody's sort of sleepy and like personal. I thought that was good. Being able to just sit quietly with Jacques Vallée while he had his breakfast and did his thing was real nice, And I enjoyed being able to meet you, Mike, for the first time, because I'm not familiar with your work, and it was sort of like just getting off a plane, arriving at the hotel, and both of us being like, "Oh, hey, where are we going?"
Hey, I know you.
Yeah, those are the kind of moments I enjoy as well. And that's what's fun about this kind of thing, when different, everybody can come together. It's really the coming together, and now going out with the way media is now, we can bring this out into other conversations and stuff. So I like the extended conference, the extension of it into these sort of things.
Yeah, me too. And I, like Mike, I drove from Los Angeles out to Houston. And the reason I did that, strangely, is because Hussein, our friend that David and I were supposed to room with, he couldn't make it. And I didn't find that out till a couple of weeks before. Maybe it's less than that. But I told him, because my mother passed away in January, and I said, I'm just going to get in a car and drive out to New Mexico and back, because I just need to do that. And Hussein said, when are you going to do that? And it turned out like I was going to be in Albuquerque like 3 or 4 days before the conference. He said, why don't you just drive there? I said, yeah, you're right. And so I did. And on the way there, I visited people that I hadn't seen in years. On the way back, I visited people. I stayed with Nick Redfern one night. I stayed with Tui Snyder, the writer in Texas, and her husband for a couple of nights. And just, I stopped in Roswell and went to the archive there, and I found old copies of my magazine and Miles's old magazine, Elf-Infested Spaces, in the archive, in the Roswell Museum archive. And then, getting there, and I had all kinds of weird things happen to me on the way, just personal things, not paranormal things. But then I get there, and the first morning I wake up, I see Valet walking across the lobby, and he kind of nods and smiles, and I come over and talk to him, and it was just this, very nice moment. And there were a lot of very nice moments like that with people old friends, new friends, people I totally respect, and it basically formed a lot of my opinions on things. And I keep realizing this every time I write something, it's like, oh yeah, that came from Whitley, or oh yeah, that came from Jeff, or oh yeah, that came from Mike, or whatever. And then I met Klaus Savon from the Archives for the Unexplained. We had a very nice talk, and we exchanged cards, and he gave me his book, and he's actually helping us out a little bit with the UFO Tarot thing now, because we need source material, and he's one of the people, besides Miles and a couple other people, that have this source material. And so, the connections made there, I think, were deeper and more meaningful for me than just about any conference that I can think of. So usually, conferences I see people, I go, hey, how you doing? And I'll go talk to somebody I haven't met before and all that. But just this felt like I just said at the beginning, we all know something. We all think something's going on. We're all approaching it from a different angle, from a different place, but we all know it's the same thing. And we all know we have a hold of this elephant from different places. And the fact that we can see maybe slightly what that different place was for these different people, it's enriching. It was certainly enriching for me. I mean, it was like, I came home from that. It's like, oh, I got to get going. I got to do this and that. And, it was very energizing. So, a series of just little interactions, which is, happens at these conferences. But for this one, they meant, quite a bit more to me. Yeah, I met Paul Smith. I'd never met him before. I knew about him. I had actually, when I was working for Coast, I saw one of his posts on remote viewing, and I actually posted it on the Coast News thing. And he wrote to me to thank me and say, I got like 10,000 hits off of that, man. Thanks so much. I said, well, it was a good essay. And when I saw him, he said, you're the one that did that. That was you. And I said, yeah, Paul. And so we talked, and we went to dinner at one point, and I had to drive him back. And David and I were in the car with him. David remembers this. So we're in the car with, legendary remote viewer Paul Smith, and my radio was on, or my iPod was on, and Brian Eno's song "Babies on Fire" came on, and Paul Smith, 70-something-year-old remote viewer, said, "This is pretty good. I like this. What is this?" It was a strange, weird meta moment during the conference that just, that's probably one thing, besides talking to Jacques for like 20 minutes, that's the one thing that kind of sticks with me was remote viewer Paul Smith enjoying a Brian Eno song.
That's cool. Yeah, Paul's I hadn't seen Paul since he moved away from Austin to Utah, so that was really nice to see him again. And it was just wonderful meeting so many people who I had only met, virtually or distantly, David and Mike and so many others. And for me, particularly, as you mentioned, Klaus Svahn, I mean, the archives for UFOs, archives for the unexplained over there in Sweden, that was the biggest influence on me to lead me to found my own nonprofit archive on these subjects. And having corresponded, limitedly with him and some of the other folks behind that organization over the years, it was just phenomenal to meet him and not really know what to expect. And him just being so friendly and welcoming. And we ended up spending quite a bit of time together. Something we didn't get to go into is I did get to go and actually look at some of the archives, which, here we're at this conference celebrating the creation of this thing. And all the way across the campus is where the actual archive is. And there was I know some small groups did go and see the displays and maybe got to see, but we got to go behind the scenes and see some of the material, bringing out some of the communion letters and that sort of thing. And that was fantastic. And partly that was because of Klaus being like, no, we've got to go do this. That's why I'm here, and got to meet the historian, Greg Agikian. And one of the best things is, I think, is really what you're all saying is so much of the best moments of these kinds of conferences is that outside the conference networking and hanging out and storytelling and just speculating and answering questions that we each have about stuff, because we each often have the answers to things that we've been wondering about. And that very first night, I guess Thursday night, was when I got to hang out really late afterwards with Klaus and Greg Agigian, and had one of those UFO conversations that I so hunger for, and was so satisfied by the end of the evening. And it's those that I live for. We're really close to the end here. I'm really curious. Is this going to have any effect? Is this as significant as it feels to me to you? Do you think this really is going to make a difference? Is this archive and this conference and what is yet to come? Is it significant?
It is to me.
Well, I guess it would be significant if the attendees and the people who watched online, let's say, if the ripples in the pond that this conference made continue, but where other people make more ripples in the pond. So I think the conference can't just be a static event that took place. The reaction people had to it has to, which I feel it will to a great degree, because I think Jeff Kripal alone has influenced the ripples in the pond in the way that we talk about these issues and these disparate phenomena, not just UFOs, but all kinds of other things.
Yeah, and I think this, right? Like, we're all talking about it, and we're bringing this forward. The connections that are made in it, they make a change. That was what I started looking at with the Center for Theory and Research with Aslan, was the conversations that were happening here when people got together and just had sort of intimate conversations and stuff were rippling out and causing books to be written and more conversations to be had in that. And then, like, I think it's like Mike was kind of saying, it's up to us in some ways to carry that forward, since we all do media and write and do podcasts and all the rest of it. It's kind of up to us to carry that forward. I'm co-curating a UFO art show with folk art and visionary art and outsider art in Athens, Georgia, in October of this year through November. And I'm going to try to sort of bridge that archive event thing and make it tangentially connected to that. Hopefully Greg will actually be coming out to talk at that, and we have a lot of great artists, possibly even maybe Howard Finster art. Howard Finster being the guy who did some of the covers for I think Talking Heads had a Howard Finster, didn't they?
Yeah, Little Creatures had the Howard Finster cover.
Yeah, so he's a well-known folk artist from Georgia. So we're hopefully going to have a Howard Finster piece or two in the show, and then a bunch of different contemporary folk artists in that. Marcus Red, who was at the archives and spoke on our panel. He's a historian, multimedia artist. He's like a Renaissance man sort of figure, and he has a video, an art film on African cosmologies. It's a beautiful film, and hopefully we'll be screening that and stuff. So, I
Is
think
he coming out for that?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Hopefully that would be cool if he
Yeah,
was.
I had dinner with him and talked to him extensively, and
yeah, he's
once again you find out, oh, you were approaching it from this angle,
yeah.
but he's also approaching it from the art angle, which is what the kind of the fulcrum of how we connected.
Yeah, he's amazing. So I mean, the point being like that, if we, as we each go forward, I mean, we're all doing this stuff anyway, and I think that as we meet up in things like the archive and meet new people, and it bridges, and the nets get wider and the conversations get wider, I think it definitely makes a change,
Yeah, all this stuff, all the people doing this from all the way back to Kehoe and Hynek and Valet, and then later people like Greg Little and Keith Thompson and people like that. All these people are contributing, and as Mike was talking, I was thinking it's a chain reaction. Like this atom goes and hits the other one, and that breaks apart, and then this creates a tree. And they all have different branches, and I think one of the main branches was the Archives of the Impossible Conference. Another main branch, if you want to think about it, is the Society for the SCU. What's that society for the one that Rich Hoffman runs? They're having their conference.
Scientific Coalition.
Scientific Coalition for UAP or UFOs. That's another branch of it. But all these things are trying to push understanding and research forward, and I think that this is good. This is the most activity I've seen, like novel activity I've seen around the UFO subject ever, actually, in my experience. I mean, a lot of it went on the 70s. There was a slight resurgence in the 80s. But yeah, this is the biggest resurgence I've seen in a while. I don't know if the rest of you agree with me, but I see this as part of a continuum, and that this was kind of the AOI conference was one of the main pushes in that continuum.
Well, thank you all for coming and participating in this review and discussion. And thank you to all our viewers and folks who will be catching the archive of this. I'm sure we'll be having further discussions. The Anomaly Archives will be continuing to put out educational materials related to the subjects and the collection that we preserve here in Austin. Tomorrow I'm doing an outreach event for the Austin Archives Bazaar, which is a free festival featuring archives from around Austin and Central Texas. Last time we participated in 2018. They do it every 2 years. We were sandwiched between a paleontology dinosaur-oriented archive and a beer archive, so always fun. And where is it happening? But at a beer garden, so fun will ensue, and there'll be lots of cross-pollination. And I definitely will be talking about the Rice University archives, because it is going to hopefully bridge that gap. It is hopefully going to really start having those ripple effects. I've been saying for a while, it seems like the disciples, the students of Kripal and Pasulka, they all go out and they start teaching, and they have an influence, and it just goes wider and wider and wider, and that's just in the academic world. So thank you all so much. I'm going to close this out, but we can talk briefly afterward. I know you probably all have places to go, so no worries. But thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. This has been Anomaly Archives Presents, and we'll be back again soon. Good night.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to use the restroom.
Me too.